Wyoming Territory, 1871. The wind howled through the pines above Elk Creek. When Thomas Grady first saw the smoke curling from the chimney of a cabin no one had lived in for over a year, he tugged his horse to a stop, narrowing his eyes. "That place is supposed to be empty," he muttered to himself, brushing a hand over his jaw. The late afternoon sun was sinking behind the jagged ridge to the west, casting long shadows over the snow-dusted meadow. He had come for solitude to hunt, maybe set up camp, but the thin trail of smoke changed his course. He dismounted quietly, boots crunching on frostbitten grass, and led his horse into the trees. The cabin sat nestled in a hollow, half hidden by overgrown brush and fir. The front porch sagged. One shutter hung loose, but there was light inside, steady, flickering. Someone was there. He stepped closer, keeping low. Through the cracked window, he saw a woman. Young, alone. She moved slow, like her bones ached. Her dark hair was tied back roughly, her dress patched at the sleeves. She stirred something in a pot over the fire, then paused and rubbed at her eyes. Thomas stepped back and waited. She was not squatting or trespassing. She belonged here, or thought she did. The next morning, he returned. This time he made noise. Let his boots crunch louder, let his horse nicker. He walked to the cabin door and knocked. No answer. He waited, then knocked again. "Ma'am." His voice was steady, not too loud. Inside, something moved. Then the door cracked open just enough for a pale face to appear. Big, wary eyes met his, and he saw the barrel of a rifle just below them. "I do not want trouble," she said, voice hoarse. "I believe you." "I do not mean any either," Thomas said. "Name's Thomas Grady. I saw smoke yesterday. Just making sure everything's all right." The door didn't move. Neither did the gun. "I am fine," she said. "You live here?" A pause. Then she nodded. "Once." He hesitated. "Mind if I water my horse down by the creek?" Her eyes flicked past him, then back. "It's not my land." "Still polite to ask," he said, tipping his hat. "Thank you." She closed the door without another word. He returned the next day, and the one after. Never pushed, never lingered too long. He brought her bread from town once, left it on a stump. She did not thank him. But the next time he came, the bread was gone. Her name was Adaline Vance. He learned that on the fifth day, when she finally opened the door wide enough to step out. "You keep showing up," she said, crossing her arms. He shrugged. "I hunt near here." "You could hunt anywhere." "I could," he said. "But then I would not know if you were still breathing." That made her blink. "I do not need help," she said. "I believe you," Thomas answered. "But sometimes people need company without knowing it." She stared at him for a long time. Then, with a quiet sigh, she stepped aside. "Come in." Just for a minute. The cabin was spare. Clean, but worn. A single cot, a small table, a shelf with 3 books. No photographs. No voices inside but hers. He sat across from her, hat in his lap. She poured him weak tea and did not meet his eyes. "Your folks used to live here?" he asked gently. She nodded. "My parents. And my little brother. They died last spring. Fever spread through the valley." Her hands twisted in her lap. "I buried them out back." Thomas looked down. "I am sorry. I stayed," she said, like she owed him an explanation. "No one else wanted the land. I could not leave it. It is all I have. You do not owe anyone a reason." She looked at him then. "You are the first person I have spoken to in 6 months." He smiled faintly. "Glad I did not say anything foolish then." Her lips twitched, like a smile wanted to come, but did not quite make it. After that, he came by often. Never overstepped. He chopped firewood one morning without asking. Repaired the loose shutter. Left a sack of potatoes just inside the gate. She never asked him to, but she started offering him tea, and sometimes stew if she made enough. They talked more. About little things. The weather. The creek. A hawk she saw circling the ridge. One evening, snow fell heavy and sudden. He arrived soaked through, shivering. "You cannot ride back in this," she said. "I will be all right," he said, brushing snow from his shoulders. "You will not. You will freeze," she said, frowning. "Stay." He hesitated, then nodded. "Only if you are sure." She nodded once. "You can sleep by the fire." He dried his clothes and laid his bedroll near the hearth. She gave him a blanket, then sat across from him on the floor. "You remind me of my father," she said quietly. He never said much, but when he did, it mattered. Thomas looked at her. "You remind me of someone too. My sister." She was quiet like you. Brave, even when she was scared. Adaline turned her face away. I do not feel brave. Bravery is not about what you feel, he said. It is what you do anyway. They fell quiet. The fire popped between them. That night, she woke screaming. He was up in an instant, kneeling beside her cot. She thrashed against the blankets, sweat on her brow. Adaline, he said, voice firm. You are safe. You are here. Her eyes flew open, wild. Then she saw him, and the fight left her limbs. She blinked hard, breathing fast. I thought she covered her face. I thought I was back in that fever summer. He reached out and gently took her hand. She did not pull away. You are not, he said. You are here. With me. She gripped his hand hard. I did not think I would ever see another person again. You do not have to be alone anymore, he said, his voice low. Her eyes met his. Do you mean that? He nodded. I do. She leaned forward before she thought, resting her forehead against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her carefully, like she might break. But she did not break. She let herself be held. When morning came, she made him coffee. He fixed the broken latch on the door. And when he left, she stood in the doorway and watched him ride off, her hand pressed to her heart. She had lived alone after her family perished, until a cowboy found her hiding. By late January, the snow had thickened across the Elk Creek Basin, blanketing the hills in a silence that muffled even the wind. The creek froze shallow in places, silvered under ice. Thomas returned every few days, sometimes with dried venison or tanned hides, sometimes just with himself, his presence quiet but steady. Adaline had begun to leave the door unlatched. The morning he brought her a bundle of cured tobacco leaves wrapped in cotton cloth, she looked at it as though unsure what to do. For trading, he said. Winter's dragging longer than expected. If you run low on anything, this might fetch flour or salt in town. She took the bundle and studied his face. You think ahead more than most men. He shrugged, slipping off his gloves. My brother never did. Got himself stuck one winter 3 days from help. Learned from it. You have a brother? She asked, setting the tobacco on the shelf beside a tin of beans. Had, he said. He passed 5 years ago. Horse slipped crossing the Platte in spring flood. She nodded once, not prying. I'm sorry. He sat near the hearth, stretching his legs. You always live this far from town? She poured hot water over dried yarrow and sat across from him. We came when I was 12. My father wanted land far from the rail. Said noise spoiled a man's thinking. Thomas smiled faintly. He wasn't wrong. He planted rye and potatoes. Built this place with his hands. I remember helping him notch the beams. She paused. I still hear his boots on the porch sometimes. Just before sleep takes me. He glanced at the floorboards. Memory's a strange companion. Comes quiet, but it stays. She looked into her cup. It's better when you're here. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he traced his thumb over a scratch in the table. You ever think of leaving this place? Adaline's shoulders tensed. Where would I go? There are homesteads needing teachers. Towns looking for herbalists. You've a sharp mind and steady hands. She looked at him then, chin lifting slightly. I'm not ready to leave them behind. Not yet. He nodded, not pressing her. Then I'll keep riding this way. That night, a coyote held up the eastern ridge. Thomas stayed in the lean-to he'd built beside the barn. When he stepped out before first light, she was already outside, feeding the chickens. You're up early, he said, his breath misting. I had a dream I was in a house with more rooms than I could count, and everyone was empty. She tossed feet into the dirt. Didn't want to go back to sleep. He leaned on the fence. Dreams like that don't always mean loss. Sometimes they mean space waiting to be filled. She kept her gaze on the birds. Do you believe that? I believe in what's possible, he said. And I've seen things grow in hard soil. The next day, she asked if he'd help her mend a shed roof that had started to sag. He climbed up after breakfast, hammer and nails in hand. She held the ladder, eyes squinting at the sun. You ever think of marrying? She asked, not looking up. His hand paused on the shingle. I did once. Years ago. What happened? She wanted Kansas City. I wanted open sky. Adaline was quiet for a while. Then, and now. He looked down at her. Now I want something else. She met his gaze, then turned away, fingers brushing the rough wood of the ladder. I don't know how to talk to folks anymore. Not like I used to. You're doing fine, he said, tapping in a nail. That night, she insisted he eat inside. The stew was thin but warm, and she'd found wild garlic to steep in it. Afterward, they sat by the fire, neither speaking. The quiet between them had changed shape, less like distance, more like understanding. She reached for the small box tucked beneath the hearthstones and drew out a folded piece of paper. It's a letter my brother wrote before he died. I read it sometimes when I feel myself slipping. Thomas didn't ask to see it. What does it say? She unfolded it slowly. He wrote, "Don't let the dark take everything. Keep one window open, even if it's small." They sat a long time after that, until the fire burned low. "I'll bring seed potatoes next time," he said, standing. She nodded, eyes on the coals. "And I'll start clearing the lower plot." He reached for his coat, pausing as she stood too. Her hand brushed as she passed him his hat. It was the first time she'd touched him without fear. When he stepped out, she watched him go from the doorway again. But this time, her shoulders had eased, and her hand stayed at her side. The next morning, she began sweeping the front step. Not because it needed it, but because she knew someone would be walking up it again soon. By late February, the creek had begun to groan under its own thaw. Thin cracks spidered across the ice, and the air carried the raw scent of earth waking beneath snow. Adaline stood near the edge of the tree line, apron hemstiff with frost, watching Thomas lead a pair of pack mules over the rise. His hat was low against the wind, but he raised a hand when he caught sight of her. She didn't wave back, just waited, arms folded, heart beating in a way it hadn't for years. He brought dried beans, a coil of rope, and a bundle wrapped in coarse linen. "Found this in a trader's wagon near Crowheart," he said, setting the bundle gently on the table inside. "Said it came through from St. Louis." She unwrapped it slowly. A length of calico cloth, blue as a mountain jay's wing, with tiny red flowers stitched along the selvage. Her throat closed. "For the spring planting," he added, rubbing the back of his neck. "Could make a dress, if you're of a mind." She ran her fingers over the fabric. "I haven't sewn anything new since before." Thomas didn't fill the silence. She folded the cloth carefully and placed it on the shelf above the hearth. "Thank you." He nodded once, then looked toward the window. "I passed a man riding out from the West Ridge. Said he was surveying land for a cattle outfit." Adaline's brow furrowed. "That ridge is too rough for driving herds. They're looking to lay claim before the thaw. Might file on land that's not been cleared in years." Her shoulders tightened. "They'll come looking here." "They might. But you've got proof of occupancy. And I can help you draw up the claim proper." She turned toward him. "I steady. Why are you doing all this?" He held her gaze. "Because I want to." She drew in a breath that felt too large for her ribs. "I don't know what it means to let someone in anymore. I'm not sure I remember how." Thomas took a slow step forward. "It doesn't have to happen all at once. Just one day, then another." Her voice dropped. "And what then?" "Then we see what grows." That night, she brought down a box from the high shelf near the rafters. Inside were scattered bits of her mother's embroidery, a broken brooch, and a folded paper with the deed her father had never filed. She handed it to Thomas without speaking. "I'll ride into Lander in the morning," he said. "Have it recorded." She leaned against the doorframe, arms loose at her sides. "You always know what to do." "No," he said gently, "but I know how to stay." She walked to him slowly, as if the floor might shift beneath her. When she reached him, her fingers slipped around his wrist. "Then stay." The next morning, she packed him a half loaf of rye and a pouch of dried apples. He saddled his horse while she stood on the porch, the sun barely over the ridge. He looked back once, just before he disappeared down the trail. She went inside and cleared space on the table. Hauled the spinning wheel from the corner. Started sewing the blue calico into something that felt like beginning again. Thomas came back from Lander with the deed filed and a small tin of hard candies he said had reminded him of something, though he wouldn't say what. He handed the paper to Adaline without ceremony, but she read the seal twice, then folded it as if it were something fragile. She didn't speak, just set it on the shelf beside the ledger her father had kept, and went back to stirring the pot on the stove. They didn't talk about what the paper meant. Not right away. Instead, she asked him to help dig out the root cellar, the door of which had swollen tight with the cold. He did, and afterward, she gave him a place at the table without asking who he was writing back to. A week passed before she asked, "Did you ever think about building a place of your own?" He looked up from the blade he was honing. Not for a long time. She didn't press him, just let the question linger like steam from the coffee mug between them. That afternoon, she took him down to the far edge of the property, to a place where the trees thinned and the ground was soft enough to turn. "We used to keep bees here," she said, brushing snow from a fallen post. "I think I might again." He crouched, running his hand along the earth. "You'd need clover." Maybe some wild mint. I thought I'd ask the widow Evans if she's got seed left. She's got more garden than she needs now, with her boys gone east. Thomas stood slowly. You've been thinking ahead. I have, she said, looking past him toward the ridge. And I've been thinking about what it would mean to let someone stay. Not just visit. Not just help. His jaw worked slightly, but he didn't look away. Say the word. She lifted a brow. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth the trouble ever is. They didn't speak for a moment. A woodpecker hammered somewhere high above, the sound sharp against the hush. I don't want to lose what I've built, she said. You wouldn't, Thomas answered. You'd be adding to it. That evening, she set 2 plates out without hesitation. They ate quietly, but the space between them had shifted again, no longer careful or uncertain, but full of something new. That night, he slept inside, not on the floor, not beside the hearth, but in the narrow bed beside her, boots off, shirt folded on the chair. She didn't speak when he slid in beside her, just turned toward him and placed her hand beneath his. He didn't move, didn't press, just breathed with her until sleep came. The next morning, they didn't talk about it. He went to check the fencing near the creek bend, and she boiled water for washing. But when he returned, she had mended the tear in his shirt cuff and left it folded by his saddlebag. In early March, she asked if he'd help her mark out a space for a hen house. And maybe, she added, glancing up from where she knelt with the measuring string, a room off the back. Something with a proper window. He paused, watching her. For guests. For you, she said. If you're staying. He knelt beside her. I wasn't planning on leaving. She reached over and pressed her palm to the back of his hand, the way someone might test bread for warmth. Good. They spent the next days clearing brush, hauling stone from the creek bed, and measuring timber. He showed her how to set joists with care, how to brace against wind. She showed him where the soil held moisture longest, where the deer passed in early dusk. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the ridge, she leaned against the doorway of the lean they'd begun to tear down. I used to think I'd be buried here, same as them. Alone. Thomas didn't answer, just walked over and stood beside her. But I don't think that anymore, she said. He took her hand, rough and calloused like his. Neither do I. And when she turned to him, her eyes didn't carry the weight of the past anymore. They held something steadier, something forward-looking, as if the thaw had finally reached her bones. They walked back toward the house together, the light behind them long and gold, the snow melting in slow, certain patches across the field. The rains came early that spring, soft and steady over the Elk Creek Basin. The roof held firm, patched and braced where it once sagged, and the garden rows behind the cabin darkened with promise. Adaline stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a line of damp soil along her forearm where she'd been transplanting early onions. Thomas stepped up behind her, setting down a small crate of nails and hinges. You've got shoots coming up near the fence, he said, brushing mud from his boots with the toe of a stick. I saw, she answered, voice low. I'm still on the field. I almost didn't plant this year. Feared what it might mean. What does it mean to you now? She glanced over at him, rain misting her hair. That I'm not waiting on ghosts anymore. He reached for her hand, knuckles scraped from hammer work. Good. Because I'm here. She led him inside, and they sat at the table, the soft patter of rain against the windows filling the quiet. She drew out a folded paper from the drawer, smoothed it flat. It was a hand-drawn map. The northern edge showed the slope beyond the creek, and the southern margin ran to where the timberline began. She tapped a spot near the middle. I was thinking we might build something small here, she said. A barn. Proper one. If we're keeping livestock again. He studied the page. We'll need to dig post holes before midsummer. But it's good land. She nodded. I've been keeping ledger of costs. I figure if we trade with the Evans woman for seed and I sell off the last of my mother's tinctures in town, it gets us halfway. I've been trapping beaver where the tributary cuts east, he said. Fur buyers will pay well come June. Her brow lifted. You've been doing that without telling me. Didn't want to promise anything before I saw the runs were healthy. He leaned back, looking at her with quiet certainty. But they are. That night, as thunder rolled far off, they shared the bed again, closer than before, her palm resting against his chest like it had always belonged there. She didn't wake with dreams anymore. Instead, she rose early, made coffee while he saddled the mule, and they worked side by side without needing to speak much. In April, they rode to town together. She wore the blue calico she'd sewn into a plain dress with long sleeves and a narrow waist. He wore his best shirt, brushed clean and mended where she'd stitched the cuff. Folks in Lander watched them pass, some with curiosity, a few with quiet nods. No one asked questions. At the courthouse, they signed the final papers for a marriage record. No preacher, no gathering. Just ink and names and her hand in his as they stepped out into the sunlight. "You sure?" he asked. She squeezed his fingers. "I was sure before we left the ridge." They didn't throw rice or share cake. Instead, they rode back slow, stopping once beneath the cottonwoods to eat bread and apples by the creek. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he kissed the top of her head like it was the only thing he'd ever wanted to do. By midsummer, the barn frame stood tall. Rough-hewn beams joined clean at the corners. She painted the trim a soft green, laughing when he teased her about it. They built stalls inside, not for show, but for the animals they planned to keep come fall. In August, the beehives returned to the south field. She stood in the clover, watching them rise and settle, a small smile tugging at her mouth. "You think they'll stay this time?" he asked, stepping up beside her. "They will," she said. "They've got something worth staying for." In the evenings, they read by lamplight. He traced her wrist with his thumb while she stitched new curtains for the kitchen. She repaired his belt without him asking. He carved a wooden comb for her, smoothed and polished, and tucked it into her hand without a word. When the leaves turned, they harvested together. She filled jars with squash and beans, and he smoked meat in the stone pit behind the shed. The cellar filled. The roof never leaked. The fire never burned too low. One night, as frost edged the windows and the stove gave off its steady glow, she sat across from him, her fingers curled around a mug. "I used to think the world ended here," she said. "At this ridge. At this house." He reached for her hand, warm and familiar. "And now it begins here." He stood, pulled her gently to her feet, and kissed her like it was the most natural thing in the world. They didn't speak again that night, not with words. But everything that mattered moved between them, slow and certain, like spring thaw through the valley. Years passed. The barn filled with animals. The house grew by a room. Neighbors came by more often, drawn by honey and herbs and the quiet steadiness of the couple who lived where the pines gave way to meadow. They never left Elk Creek. Never needed to. He built her a bench beneath the cottonwoods. She planted lilacs by the porch. And every night, long after the lamps were out and the wind moved through the trees above, he held her with the same quiet strength that had brought her back to life. She had lived alone once, in a silent house full of memory. But she never would again.